wrecking yard. I met my true love down in the wrecking yard. I met my true love called a wreck Chevrolet, which I see every day. It has old worn out tires.
Hi, and welcome to the inaugural episode of The Wrecking Yard. My name is Tony, and I'm the head cheese around these parts. The purpose of The Wrecking Yard is to build an archive of information on the interesting folks who inhabit the worlds of music, film, and art by hosting a weekly podcast with an accompanying page of information on our website. Boy, you can really tell I'm reading this, can't you? Before we start, I'd like to state up front that I'm not claiming to be any sort of expert, and I'm going to make mistakes like anybody else. My interview style is currently somewhat cautious with a halting manner, but I hope that you can stick with me while I work it out. One can only assume that as I spend more time behind a microphone that I will become more relaxed and develop a more casual style. Running this thing will not be a cheap endeavor, and as such, we have set up a donation page. If you'd like to help me with what is sure to be some expensive road work, feel free to do so. If not, feel free to not do so. I will keep the site and its contents free regardless. What you are about to hear, that is if you're going to go any further, is my very first podcast featuring Paul Mahern. Paul was a member of several highly regarded musical outfits, including the Dandelion Abortions, the Datura Seeds, and the Zero Boys, and his current band, Ask, who just have a new album out just this last week. He is also a very highly regarded studio guru, and more than a handful of musicians have recorded some of their best-sounding stuff under his tutelage. I was in a band back in the 80s, and when it came time to record our first record, there was really no one else in town we wanted at the helm. He was pretty much the first and last choice. Not only was he great to work with, but he was also very patient with what amounted to a band with several diverse personalities. When I decided to do this, he was always my first choice, not only because he's an interesting guy with lots of background, but also I knew that if there was any troubleshooting to be done on this setup I put together, he would be able to do it without breaking a sweat. And you know what? That's exactly what happened. A 30-pin connector and a free app later, and I was off to the races. As this podcast starts, we are talking about his air conditioner, which he describes as very expensive but also very silent. Hope you enjoy our talk as much as I did, and I'd like to thank Paul again for agreeing to be our first guest.
All right, I'm here. That, one of the most expensive pieces of equipment in this studio we're in right now is that Mitsubishi heater air conditioner. It's the quietest unit you can buy. $5,000.
Well, Mark Mahern needs one because he always complains about how hot it is in his garage because he has to shut off the air conditioner for the interviews.
You should just...
I know. I know you can afford it at this point.
Mark Mahern he comes to Bloomington oftentimes.
I know he was just here a couple months ago.
Yeah, he loves the Comedy Attic. And I was walking down the street. This was on a Sunday, so he'd played like Friday and Saturday night. It was sold out. I didn't get to see either a show, but I was walking down Walnut, and he was walking down 4th Street, and I couldn't see him. He came just past this building into my view as I was coming, and I was on the phone. And I've never done this before because, like in Indiana, you don't see celebrities.
Not very often.
So you're not used to like the celebrity protocol, right? So I go, Mark, and he turned around and looked at me like, holy fuck, a stalker, and then I was like, it's Paul. I love your show. He's like, thanks, buddy. And he walked off, and he took it really well, but I felt kind of embarrassed.
Are we recording now? Well, when I was living in California, that happened to me all the time.
Oh yeah,
all the time. And there was one time that I was up at Virgin Records, and I was just flipping through stuff, blah 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 blah. And I look up, and Ben Affleck was on the other side of the aisle looking at me, and I'm like, oh, Ben Affleck, whatever. So I look at my phone, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm late. So I start to haul ass out of Virgin, and they have this staircase that goes down, over, and down. And I'm running, and I ran right into Steven Soderbergh and his wife, who used to be the host on all those E! shows. I forget, as Jules Asner.
Oh yeah.
And I almost knocked them on the ground, and I felt so shitty. And then I ran out, and then I saw the woman who played, Grace on Will and Grace buying a magazine outside. It was just like it would happen literally all the time. There was a specific coffee shop that if you were a big fan of Rage Against the Machine, I could tell you that every single morning, Zach De Roca would pull his Mercedes up and go in there for his coffee every single day. And every evening, Christina Ricci would stop by the same one and get whatever it was that she got on the way out. Now, I guess this means I spent a lot of time at this coffee shop, which I did because I had nothing else to do and I didn't know anybody. And so I would just go and hang out there in the morning, go do something, and then go there in the day. But it was weird because you would see the same people. And the last famous person I saw before I left, it was like 2 days before I moved back. I was at the grocery store and I ran into Tom Hanks' son, Colin Hanks. I was like, ah. And I had worked with him on something earlier. I forget what it was. But that was it. Yeah, in Hollywood, you see people all the time. But yeah, I can imagine here, it's a rare occurrence. And honestly, I would usually not bother them. Matter of fact, I would always not bother them. Because I figured, they got people bugging them all the time.
Yeah.
I don't really need autographs. At the time, I didn't have a phone that took pictures. So there was really no reason at all for me to stop these people and just go, hey, I really think you're cool or whatever. I'm sure they hear it all the time.
Uh-huh.
So,
well, this was one of those things where I listened to his podcast a fair amount, but I guess when you get, and this happens to probably people who are on TV series a lot, it's like if you see them a lot, you start to kind of imagine that you're friends or something,
or at least you know them.
They know them, right? Like that, like they're an aspect of your life, and I think I had that moment, but.
Yeah, I mean, actually, he talks about that. He had someone on recently. He was talking about how when people see you enough, they assume that that's who you are, whereas you may just be acting a part, in a play.
Uh-huh.
I mean, like for instance, like on The Walking Dead, the main character, he does a very nice Southern drawl. I'm sure a lot of people think that he's from the South.
Right.
People that haven't seen Love Actually and have heard his British accent.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, you don't. After working in that industry for 10 years, the artifice of it is very real to me.
Uh-huh.
I know that sounds weird, but I mean, I watch TV now and I see the same sets over and over.
Right.
I mean, like whenever they use a state building or a building that's supposed to be like a government building, they always use the same building over and over. I mean,
it's a real building, or is it on a set somewhere?
No, it's a real building downtown. There are certain parts of downtown Los Angeles that vaguely look like New York. And so whenever they need an outdoor New York scene, they go to these same 2 or 3 blocks. Like NYPD Blue, Heroes. I mean, all these shows that I worked on, they were all the same 2 or 3 blocks. Always. And on, like, say, for instance, the clock tower from Back to the Future was also the entire town of the Ghost Whisperer. And like the town that the Gilmore Girls was set in, they used that for everything. Everything. I see that all of it. And it's weird, when I first started doing the background work, I had some people tell me, they said, look, this is going to ruin things for you because you're going to find yourself looking at the people in the background and going, oh, hey, I know that dude.
Right.
Oh, I know that guy. And it's true. I'll be sitting there watching TV and all of a sudden I go, hey, I know that dude. And he just walked by. And the flip side of that is I would call my mom and I go, hey, Mom, I'm going to be on, Without a Trace tonight. There's a scene. It's a courthouse. I'm on the jury or whatever. And she'd watch it and she'd call me back and she'd go, well, I looked, but I didn't see you. And I just go, Mom, did you look behind the guy who was doing the acting? And she's like, no. So, yeah, it took a while for my mom to catch on to look beyond what she was supposed to see in order to see, me walking by with a briefcase or holding a clipboard or whatever.
What doesn't it? When you mention the actor with the Southern drawl, is he actually British?
Yeah.
Doesn't it weird you out when British actors do American accents?
Well, in Get Out, right now, there's a big stink about that because the lead actor in that is British. He was in one of my favorite episodes of Black Mirror. Actually.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah?
The second one, was it 10,000 Merits or whatever?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that, honestly, the other ones creeped me out enough, but that one really creeped me out because, that whole thing, like, where he would stop looking at the screen and he would get penalized for it.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, there was all these little things like, we know you're not watching, start watching. And that just looked like the most hellish existence. I mean, it looked horrible. And then when they had those scenes where he's walking, like, you know, down the hall, and you look in the background, and there's like thousands of rooms of these people riding these bikes that you don't know why they're riding them. You assume they're probably providing power, you know, to everybody else or whatever. But yeah, that episode really creeped me out. And the lead actor, the one who has the big meltdown toward the end, he's the lead actor in Get Out. And Samuel L. Jackson was making a big stink about it yesterday, about why, you know, why are you hiring British actors to play American people? And, you know, and I hate that. Do you remember, what was it? Was it Confessions of a Geisha, or that movie that came out like 8 or 9 years ago? People were complaining that they had a Chinese actor playing a Japanese woman. You know, and just recently there was something else they were going on about that, and I'm thinking, it's acting. You know, you get the best person that you think you can get for this role. And whether they happen to be what you need or not, as long as they can act like what you need, then that's what you need, if that's what you want. And honestly, I think it's nitpicking. I think that, you know, I'm certainly not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think the PC thing does get a little weird sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because, you're supposed to be able to say what you want, and the other guy's supposed to be able to get mad at you if he wants to. You know, I don't think that process needs to be neutered.
But there's just something to me about, like, not really recognizing the American accent as an American, especially in the Midwest, where we have, in Indiana, we have, like, and what I think is the least amount of accent.
Right. That's what we think? The first time I went to London, I'm going to record stores, and I'm trying to find bootlegs, you know, that I can bring back, and every store I go to, the guy's going, "What's that I can help you with?" And they'd laugh at me. And I'm like, do I sound like that, really? And when I went to, you know, when I was in Germany, every person I met thought I was from Texas. Every person goes, what part of Texas are you from? I'm like, so I've become very aware of it, you know, and I try to combat it as much as possible, but I know that there's no way I'm going to get rid of it, you know, so I am what I am.
That reminds me of touring, especially in Europe and Germany and Italy, on tour with the Zero Boys, and having, you know, be like after the gig, hanging out with people, and them asking me, how many guns do I have? You know, like, seriously, you know, like, how many guns do you have?
Yeah.
It's like,
they have, you know, Europe, and this is especially true probably now more than then, but they have very, very specific ideas of what we are and what we do and how we live that, you know, are very generalized to them, but they think it's very specific. You know, you know, I had somebody very earnestly ask me, "Why do you guys do everything in your car?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, he says, "You bank in your car, you eat in your car, you fuck in your car. He says, you do all these things in your car." And I had never thought about it before, but I was like, you know, I guess we're sort of a convenience-driven society, you know, and if I don't have to get out of my car to deposit a check, well, okay. And, you know, if I have a house, I probably won't do too much fucking in my car. But if I'm on my way somewhere and I need to grab something to eat, I don't want to stop, well, okay, I'll eat while I drive. I mean, but yeah, they found that also very, very strange. You know, here's a weird thing that maybe we should start talking about stuff from the beginning. But, you know, when you guys played Germany when I was there.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first time I ever saw you guys live.
Oh, really? That's so weird.
And here's the weird thing. Like, I never saw the Slammies. I never saw most of the local bands from around that time period. And I guess people thought I was being a snob or something. But if you remember correctly, we had the key to Second Time Around, the record store that I worked at. And that back room was like ours. We could do whatever we want with it, like 24 hours a day. And we had musical instruments set up back there that we could play as loud as we want, as late into the night as we want, and nobody would ever say a word. So Monday through Fridays, I mean, that's where we were. There was beer, there was weed, and there was musical instruments. So, you know, I never left that store for a good 3 or 4 years. I never left that back room during the week. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I would go out with my girlfriend, who I had made the rule. I mean, this sounds kind of asshole-ish now, and I feel kind of shitty about it, but I said, okay, Monday through Friday's mine. We're not doing anything on Monday through Friday. I'm not picking you up. We're not going to any movies. I said, you can have me for the weekends, but Monday through Friday, it's the band. I was very serious about it at the time.
How'd that work out for your relationship?
It lasted like 3.5 years. Actually, they all last about 3.5 years.
You're on a cycle.
I was on a cycle for a long time. It would be like 3 years on, 1 year off, 3 years on, 1 year off. And this went on for like 20 years. Yeah. So because of that, and none of my girlfriends, or at least up to a point, were into music, and especially not into any sort of punk rock. So even if there was a show on a Saturday or Sunday, I couldn't go because I had promised those days to her. And then during the week, you remember there weren't really that many shows during the week.
No.
So, and we were playing. So honestly, I mean, a lot of the Indiana bands that were around that time, I never saw them. And I feel bad about it now. I'm thinking like, well, there was a whole scene there. Maybe I should have participated a little bit more. But once the Math Bass started playing out, I mean, then I got a chance to start seeing more people.
Right.
But I saw the Dandelion Abortions more than I've seen the Zero Boys. I've seen the Datura Seeds more than I saw the Zero Boys.
Well, I mean, I understand that. I mean, it's somebody who makes my living off of working on music. I love to go see music, but sometimes I can't, it's just, all full of music.
I'm kind of like that way now. Well, also the tinnitus does not help. I mean, I have ringing in my ears that is like massive.
Oh, wow.
Literally right now it sounds like there's somebody sweeping in the next room. So, or actually what's more like is an old TV. When you first turn on an old TV and there's like, before the picture comes on, that's what I got. So my live show thing right now is very, very limited. The last live show I saw, I think, was Matthew Sweet down at Tufty's place, like when I first moved back. Before that, like 4 years before, I saw the Dictators. Like 3 years before that, I saw Cheap Trick. I mean, they're just very, very limited. Oh, I did see Tom Petty at the Hollywood Bowl, but I'm not going into details because that's a whole other story entirely. That when the microphones are turned off, I will tell you a whopper.
So, Matthew Sweet, was Richard Lloyd playing guitar?
No.
Because I know he toured with him.
He did, and he toured with Lloyd Cole too. He did play with Lloyd Cole when Lloyd Cole played at the Vogue, which I think was like 87 or 88, something like that. I think. Yeah. But because of the tinnitus, and also you're right. I mean, hell, dude, we're in our 50s. I've heard a lot of music. I've heard a lot of different music, and I've heard a lot of the same music, and I'm still excited about it. I'm just more picky about my excitement. Does that sound right?
No, yeah, it sounds absolutely right. And then the problem is when you get older, and then also being younger, being a record fan and collector, it's really hard to see something new without immediately categorizing it.
Right.
And that's a real problem. Because I'll see a new band and I'll halfway through their first song, I've already analyzed all their influences.
Right.
That's
but I think
probably not the healthiest.
No, but I think your brain is going to, I think to a certain extent, your brain's going to do that anyway without you being able to control it. But also to a certain extent, for me anyway, doing that is helpful, Like, for instance, I know there are people, and this is especially true when you're younger, you have this very rigid idea of what is good and what is not, what is legitimate and what is not legitimate. And usually that changed the minute your favorite person became popular. They'd all of a sudden become not legitimate. And, and it's the same thing when there's a band that sounds like somebody or vaguely sounds like somebody. You're going to get a certain percentage of people who, well, they're just ripping off blankety blank blank. But I have this totally different theory, and I know people aren't going to like it, but I like pizza, okay? I do. I like pizza. Yeah. And I can get pizza from place A, and I like it. It's good pizza. And I can get pizza from place B. It's slightly different than theirs, but it's still crust, it's still sauce, it's still cheese, it's still pizza. And I like it. It's not exactly the same as that, but it's similar. Why can't I like both? And, it's the thing. Say if a band sounds vaguely like the Beatles or vaguely like Big Star or vaguely like whoever, I don't want to not like it just because it vaguely sounds like somebody that I already like. When that happens, I go for the song. For me anyway, as I've gotten older, it's become bottom line. Just do I like the song? I don't care who's doing it. Do I like the song? If I like the song, then I like the song. And doing this is also possible that, maybe some band you don't like has 2 songs that you like.
Oh, yeah.
I allow myself to like those 2 songs, as long as it's not like Nickelback.
Well, do you find at any point as you were getting older, did you find your taste kind of going through some sort of revisionist stage?
Yes.
Where
all the
there's
time.
like something that you really didn't like when you were a kid, then you hear it and you're like, wow, that's actually pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is because I would always ask for help. I've had a really good amount of what I would call touchstone people, like people that have helped me see something that maybe I could not see on my own. I was lucky to have an uncle, who gave me records when I had like Lothar and the Hand People and the Yardbirds when I was like 6 years old. So, I kind of got a good start. And then, and he's the one that turned me on to Captain Beefheart and the Stooges and the Modern Lovers and stuff like that. Really important stuff as far as my foundations are concerned. I always hated reggae. I always just hated it. And then one day, Dave Myers was in my store, and I was like, Dave, so here's a couple blanks. Make me like reggae. So he went home, and it was easy. All he did was record a copy of This Is Reggae Music, the compilation. And it was fantastic. I was like, damn, okay, I really like this. I grew up hating country music. My mother made fun of it. My dad refused to acknowledge that it existed. One day I was on my way to Bloomington to visit Diana, my girlfriend at the time, who was going to law school here, and I grabbed some cassettes out of the case at the store, and one of them was Hank Williams' 24 Greatest Hits. So I'm driving along, I popped that in, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know this song. And then the next song came on, I was like, oh yeah, I know that song too. And by the time it was over, I realized that half of this tape was already in my DNA, and I didn't know how it got there. Really, I think that there's some things, Hank Williams being one of them, that I think they're just so pervasive as you go through life that these songs just sort of leak into you without you even knowing it.
Yeah, right.
And so there's always been people who, if I don't like something, and I know somebody who does, I'm not afraid to go, hey, look, I don't really like this. Can you help me understand it? And that's really been kind of the way I've gotten to where I am now. Is just being willing to accept somebody else's, opinion or suggestion. Because I really hated reggae. I really, it all sounded the same to me. It was all just, I was like blah 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 blah. But, and now, like I've just recently rediscovered Peter Tosh, man. Those albums, those like Legalize It and Equal Rights. I'm like going, man, those are killer records.
Yeah,
they have great songs on them. Those Burning Spear records, Toots and the Maytals. I'm not like Mr. Big Reggae or anything, but what I'm saying is I really, really like these albums that at one time I would have just completely poo-pooed. Like,
right.
No. And I think it's important, particularly in music, as you go through life, to just listen to what other folks say. You may not agree. Look, Captain Beefheart's not for everybody. I understand that. When I remember when I first saw Trout Mask Replica, I was like 8 or 9, and it scared me. I was like, oh my God, what is that? And I remember putting it back real quick because I didn't want to see it anymore. And have you ever seen any of the outtakes from that photo session where he's like holding that fish head and stuff? It's just where I would really like to track down a couple of guys from the Magic Band. That's another thing I want to do. And actually, I'm not going to say it on tape, but when we're done, I'm going to tell you what my dream interview is going to be. Just remind me to ask you because it's really good and it's really funny. But if I announce it ahead of time, it won't, it won't be as funny. Yeah. So, well, you want to start from the beginning? And I did a little bit of a Google search before I came here just to see if I'd missed anything. I didn't know you were originally from Chicago.
Well, I'm originally from Indianapolis.
Oh.
Moved to Chicago when I was 7 and was in Chicago through 8th grade and then moved back to Indianapolis. So, yeah, spent, 5-6 years in Chicago.
All right.
In the public school system.
Now, before punk rock came around, what were you listening to?
Well,
be honest.
I will. I'll be totally honest.
All right.
Well, I have older brothers and sisters, so the Beatles and the Stones were being played in the house when I was growing up. And I think the first record that I really am aware of listening to on my own repeatedly was the White Album. And then, but the first record that I think I bought was I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family. I bought I think that was the first 7-inch record that I bought. We grew up in an interracial neighborhood in Indianapolis, and I remember listening a lot to the Jackson 5 with the other neighborhood kids. So that in particular and other Motown stuff was definitely around. I don't know that we had Motown records in the house. The Hair soundtrack, we played the hell out of that thing, man. That thing was just burning up on the stereo. Jesus Christ Superstar.
That was ours.
Yeah.
I have that, dude, to this day, there are 2 albums that I have every single note and noise memorized. Yeah. It's that one and Kiss Alive. Those 2 records, if you put those records on, I could sit there and go, and then the audience goes, Paul. I mean, I could just, because I listen to it so often. But when my mom got Jesus Christ Superstar, every single day I'd come home from school and she'd be on the couch in the front room listening to it over and over and over and over for like years. And finally this lady down the street tried to turn her on to Godspell, and she listened to it like once or twice. She was like, I know, I'm not having this. Nah, get this out of here. You know,
prove to me that you're no fool.
Yeah.
Walk across my swimming pool.
Exactly.
Like some of the electric guitar work on that record is awesome.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad record. I
mean, it's a great record. And
yeah.
So, but I think that record, the White Album, they were really expansive to me, and they helped me become a recording fan. Mm-hmm. You know how it is being, you're a kid and locked in Indianapolis. There's not a whole lot of opportunities to see stuff live.
No.
So your whole experience with music is through recordings. And you come home from school and you put on the headphones, you pop that record down, and maybe it's like you got the front cover image, you got a little bit of information on the back, you put the headphones on, and the rest you have to imagine.
Right.
So you fill in all these gaps about like who these people are and where they're coming from and how this was made, and Kiss were the ultimate in when it came to
at that time, yeah.
At that time, and you just knew so little about them, and they were like the biggest band, for our generation,
right.
And yet still, you could get a little bit in the in the latest Circus magazine or the latest Cream magazine, but you really knew almost nothing
right.
about those guys.
Well, the thing about Kiss for me anyway was that the first time I ever saw them, I was watching Midnight Special, and Kraftwerk were on, and they're doing Autobahn, and I have no reference to this whatsoever. I'm seeing something, I don't know what it is. I've never heard what it sounds like. These guys aren't moving. I'm like, what in the fuck is going on here? What is this? I'm like going, okay, there can be nothing weirder than this. Nothing. And then there's a commercial, and then Kiss comes out, and I'm going, what is this world coming to? What is going on here? And then, I don't know, it was like a month or 2 later in junior high school, my friend Phil is there, and he has the booklet that comes inside Kiss Alive. And I'm like, I've always been obsessed with albums that come with stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because remember how exciting it was? You'd open it up and there'd be something. Dude, Dark Side of the Moon had 2 posters and 2 stickers in it. I was like over. If I had hated that album, I still would have bought it just because it had extra stuff in it.
It was the next level after a cereal box that had something inside of it.
So he brings his booklet, and I'm like, that booklet comes with the album? You get that book with the album? And he goes, yeah. So I went home. We lived in Carmel, down at like 106th in College. I go home. I got this giant white Jaws piggy bank, and I take a steak knife and to the bottom of it. I shake all the change out of it. I put it in my pockets, and I walk like 2 miles to Airway to get it. And it turns out that I had the exact change with the tax. I mean, I had not 1 penny left. I just hit the mark.
That's a magical story.
I know,
man.
And I'm so happy. I've got this record. I'm like going, all right. I have no idea what it sounds like. I'm like, I just know I got a record that's got a book in it. So on my way home, I stopped by my dad's apartment. He lived between where I lived and the store, and he wasn't there, but my stepmom was. She looks at it, and she goes, "You're going to hell." And she hands it back to me. And at that point, I mean, that was like my eyes had been like open. I was like, oh, they hate it. They hate it. I'm going to like this even if I don't like it. And then I took it home. And honestly, the first couple times I listened to it, it was a little bit more raw than I was used to.
Right.
But after that, I was all in. I was all in.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that before Kiss were like huge, they were a thing that was yours.
Mm-hmm.
That not a lot, the older brother made fun of them, like, because they weren't Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Your mom, of course, didn't like them because they just looked like evil.
Mm-hmm.
But they were mine, and it's hard. It's hard to get kids or even people a couple years older than me to understand how important they were. And I still say that if after Kiss Alive, if they had died in a plane crash, they would be known as a pretty good garage band that had a gimmick. Because I think those songs are good. Like Firehouse is a good song. Black Diamond is a great song.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of good songs. So that's why the Jesus from France covers so many of them.
Yeah. Well, I think that Kiss, for me, were the perfect gateway to punk rock.
That's what I tell people.
It's like because of that, because they were divisive. It's like you either liked them or you didn't.
Right.
And the whole thing was like, oh, they suck, they can't play. Which all that was like just priming me for the Sex Pistols.
Oh yeah.
But the difference was, Kiss was like live, the big announcement. Are you ready for the hottest band in the land, Kiss?
Yeah.
And they were like promoting themselves as this magical, amazing band, but you knew they weren't really that good.
No.
And then the Sex Pistols reversed that. They were like, the whole promotion was like, we suck. But you fucking listen to that record,
that
man.
album still rocks.
It's amazing record.
As a matter of fact, I listened to it for the first time in a long time just recently, and while I was listening to it, I was saying, you know what? This would still irritate my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, even all these years on. Okay, now as far as punk rock was concerned, this is how it happened for me. My uncle was an artist, or is an artist, and he was moving to New York around 74, I think. Are we good?
Yep.
Around 74, and he came back and he goes, look, he says, there's this band. He says, if you ever see an album by them, just go ahead and get it, because I think you're going to like it. And I said, well, who is it? He goes, the Ramones. I'm like, I've never heard of them. He goes, no, you wouldn't have, because they don't have anything out. But if you ever do, buy it. And I'm like, all right. So I was really into reading. I'm like, God, that sounded stupid. I'm into reading. I used to read a lot at Cream, Circus, and of course, Rock Scene.
Right.
Okay? So I'm flipping through Rock Scene, and there's a picture of the Ramones. And I'm going, hey, there's that band my uncle was telling me about. They look stupid. So, and then they were in every episode. They were in every issue. I remember one, PA shopping with the Ramones. And there was one where like one of them was inside one of the speaker cabinets going, hey, I could live in here. And I just remember thinking, really, is this what he wants me to get? Finally, one day, my mom's getting her hair done, and she asked me if I want to go with her. And it was this place next to Nova Records in Carmel, where she used to get her hair done. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll go with you. I went in Nova, and there's that Ramones album, $4.81. $5 even with tax. And I'm like, all right, I got $5, I'll do it. So I get it and I take it home, and I put it on. And the first song, I'm like going, yeah, all right, okay. The second song comes on, and I'm going, well, that sounds just like the first song. I wonder if this is defective. And so the third song comes on, and I'm like going, now that's 3 songs in a row that sounds exactly the same. What's going on here? And then my ears caught the lyrics, and I'm like going, oh, okay, that's not exactly the same. And so I went back and played it again, and I played it again, and by the end of the night, I'm jumping up and down on the bed, and I'm looking at my Emerson, Lake and Palmer albums going, you fuckers are getting out of here.
That's right.
It was like literally in one fell swoop, I got rid of like half of my album collection a week later, because none of it sounded good anymore, And then I wanted more, and I don't know if you remember how hard it was to come across this stuff. The way I used to do it, every issue of Trouser Press, I'd go back to the classifieds, and I would start sending away for singles, And what was cool about this, I don't have any of them today, but like I sent away for the first Devo single. And back then, they were so happy that anybody was buying their record, they would send you a note back. Say, hey, thanks for buying our record. We really appreciate it. Mark Mothersbaugh. I had letters from the Gang of Four. I had all these things from people thanking me for sending them $3 for their record. But that was the only way you could get it. Especially here in Indiana, nothing. There's just nothing. I mean, how did you get yours?
There was the Karma record on Post Road. Karma Records on Post Road, which I think was where maybe Gary Finley worked.
I'm sure it was.
And they had a tiny little punk rock section that had maybe 20 records in it. Mm-hmm. So it took 2 bus transfers to get from, downtown, where I live downtown in Woodruff Place, out there, and I would just buy whatever was there. I mean, I knew about the stuff from, Cream Magazine and Circus Magazine and things like that, but I never sent away for a record until, probably more like the hardcore days.
Right. I remember the first time I went the second time around. It was when they were in the old location next to the lawnmower repair shop, where like the corner wine bar and stuff is now. Mm-hmm. And I remember going in there, and they had that. Do you remember that wooden box that all the 45s were in? We had the same wooden box for the entire life of the store.
Yeah.
I'm looking in there, and I'm like, Eater. I'm like, going, hey, I think I read something about them. And then the vibrators. I'm like, hey. They only had one of each, and they only had just a couple of them. So I bought all the ones they had. And this guy who worked behind the counter, his name was Chris something. He made fun of me while I was buying. He was like, oh, you're into this punk rock, huh? Oh, you're a big deal, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, shit, I bought an Atomic Rooster album with him. I mean, give me a fucking break, but no, he just gave me a hard time, and I hated that guy. And eventually, Bob bought him out because this guy was chasing away customers. Because, you'd come in and you'd buy something, and he'd like, you're buying that? And I hated that. When I became a record store clerk, I'm sure I had a little bit of that, but I tried real hard to fight it. As far as pissing people off, I left that up to Todd.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing was is when I discovered second time around, then I didn't have to send it away from quite so much. I could just tell Bob, hey Bob, could you order this for me? And then it became a lot easier. But my big one happened the first time I went to New York City to visit my uncle after he'd moved out there. Do you remember Saturday Night Live used to be on 3 nights out of the month, and then the fourth night, or the fourth Saturday, they'd have like a news show, kind of like a 60 Minutes or something.
Yeah.
Well, when I was there, they just happened to be doing, it was the fourth week, and they didn't, Saturday Night Live wasn't on. It was a news show about this new music coming out of England. And then, of course, it was Dr. Feelgood mostly. And then, of course, then they showed like the Sex Pistols and the Damned. And they assumed we couldn't understand the lyrics. So they had the lyrics on the bottom with a follow the bouncing ball. And we were laughing our asses off. We were like, oh, man, this is really funny or whatever. So the next day we go out shopping. And the first thing I find was Talking Heads' Love Goes to Building on Fire. And I'm like, well, I saw a picture of them at the grocery store in Roxy. I'll get that. And Wayne County. And then something else. And then we went to Bleecker Bob's. And it was the first time I'd ever been there. And he was yelling at an employee, like really yelling. He's, you fucking dumbass. Blah, 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 blah. He's like cussing himself. And I'm like, 13, 14. I'm going, oh my God. I'm like, what's going on here? And I look up. And I see they've got Anarchy in the UK on EMI for $5. And I was like, I hadn't heard the Sex Pistols except on the TV, just a little bit. And I was like, all right, $5 for a 45. That's really expensive. Can I afford that? And my uncle says, you should just get it. And I was like, okay. So I got that. And ironically enough, God Save the Queen had also come out by this time. So I go back to the apartment. I got this clutch of singles, and it's kind of late, so I don't get a chance to listen to them that night. Next morning, I wake up, and I walk in the room, and my uncle's sitting on this stool with these headphones and a cup of coffee, and he's like going, God damn. God damn. Oh. And then he takes them on and he goes, you're going to want to sit here and just listen to these for a while. And so that's my cool uncle. And that was kind of like the weekend. And what's funny, when I got back home, people were like, hey, man, we couldn't get those Aerosmith tickets. I was like, yeah, whatever. I don't care. And and like a day or two later is when they announced the Elvis Costello, Mink DeVille, Dave Edmunds show at or Rockpile show at the Indiana Theater.
Yeah.
And that was my first quote unquote punk show.
Yeah.
Were you
so
there?
you were a little
I'm
you were a
2 years
little
older than you.
Yeah, you're a little in front of me with all of that. But I love that experience. I definitely had that experience with a few records where you get them, you put them on, and the first time you hear it, you're like, I don't know, it's like this is not really working. But an hour later, you're like ready to change the face of your entire record collection, and that certainly. Never mind, the Bullocks did that for me. I didn't have any of the Sex Pistols singles. So that's that 2 years age difference. The first Devo album did that.
Oh, yeah.
I was just like, the first full listen all the way through that record, at least twice, I was like, I don't know if this is music. But the fifth time through, I was like, I was calling my friends saying things like, you should be embarrassed that you've never heard this record before.
Yeah, I approached it a little with some hesitation as well, but I remember loving Uncontrollable Urge automatically. I was just like, well, damn, all right. Well, what's funny, when they were on, and people don't understand just how barren it was around here, but the first time they were on Saturday Night Live, which would have been 1979, I go to school that next Monday, and I overhear these two guys arguing because they couldn't figure out which one was John Belushi and which one was Dan Aykroyd. They thought it was a joke band like the Blues Brothers. And I'm like, they have an album, I have it, and I got so much shit. I wore a Cheap Trick shirt to school once, okay, and I almost got pummeled. Oh, fucking punk rocker. And I'm like going, it's Cheap Trick. Come on, give me a break. And I think I had a Pink Floyd belt buckle. So I was like, okay, look, guys, come on, look. Give me a break. And, the lines weren't so clearly drawn then either. Because as much as I love the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, I love Blue Oyster Cult and Kiss just as much.
Well, yeah.
That's the thing. Cult were big for me.
Yeah.
For a couple of years. Do you remember having to send away for their lyrics? They never printed their lyrics on their albums. They just gave you an address, said, if you want the lyrics, send us a big envelope. And what they did was, do you remember those old computer printouts that were like green and white lines with the holes on the side? They would literally just run them out, ball them up into a thing, shove them in your envelope, and send it to you. And every time an album came out, you had to send them another envelope, and they would send you all of them again. So each envelope got thicker and thicker and thicker, and you'd end up with 2 or 3 copies of the first couple albums' lyrics. But without them, you're lost. You ever try to read their lyrics or understand? They're impossible. They are impossible. Some of the best weird lyrics ever that make no goddamn sense. But they sounded cool to me at the time because, I was, discovering weed, I was discovering mushrooms, I was discovering all the stuff that I was, supposed to discover. But yeah, the line wasn't drawn yet. You could listen to, the Dictators, the Ramones, Pink Floyd, and Blue Oyster Cult without anybody, giving it too much. It was, I don't think it was till the early 80s that people started sort of drawing lines and taking sides.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a direct lineage from, even the Beatles and the Stones, and certainly the Cheap Trick, and then to me, Cheap Trick and the power pop stuff, and then the Ramones and the punk stuff. I can see that line very clearly, partially because I think being in the Midwest, you heard a lot of guitar rock on the radio, so the Sex Pistols record, that's a guitar rock record. It's not that different. You got the weird guys singing, but it's really not stylistically that much different than a Kiss record.
No, and it doesn't sound weird to me at all anymore. Do you remember how Ramones sounded like they were playing so fast back then? And now you listen to it going, that's not nearly as fast as granted, I've heard Slayer since then, but that's not nearly as fast as I thought it was when I was a kid.
Yeah, the line was drawn at disco.
Oh, I know, I hated it. I was, dude, and what's the weird thing? Is a lot of that stuff now,
it's awesome.
Sounds kind of all right to me. I'm like, man, the production on that is really hot.
Yeah.
And, but back then, no. If it had a beat, I was ready to spit all over it.
Yeah, me too. But that was something that I had to reevaluate. Even within the last 10 years, I kind of got hooked on Casey and the Sunshine Band, and just realizing that like they're really hitting it hard on those records. I mean, they're super tight. It's the sound of cocaine. I mean, it's like it's cocaine in music.
Yeah.
And it's really, really well done. But at the time, yeah, it was just like, absolutely not. If it wasn't done with the guitar, if the guitar wasn't the primary focus, then I wasn't interested.
Right. Kraftwerk being the exception.
Yeah.
You could listen to Kraftwerk and still be a punk. Probably just because they were from another country. Had they been from Connecticut, it would have been okay to probably hate them too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, it in a way too, it was more fun back then too, because you didn't have to. I mean, I guess you don't have to now that I'm an adult. But when I was a kid, it was really important to me to like the right stuff, and not to like the right stuff or the wrong stuff. And, there was just a lot of work to it. It's just like, oh, man, are people going to think I'm cool if I like this? Or are they going to think I'm uncool if I like this? And nowadays, it's like I said before, it's the song. I only just care about the song. And I think the reason, you were talking about the music you had in your house, we didn't have a whole lot of music in the house. My mom listened to what you would expect. My mom, Cat Stevens, Neil Diamond, stuff like that. But we listened to the radio constantly in the car throughout the 60s, WIFE, and people forget how rocking the radio was between about 64 and about 69. I mean, on my way to Grandma's house, I'm singing along with Paint It Black, or whatever Beatles song is big at the time, a lot of that power pop stuff from then, I love all that Cass and His Cat stuff. Indian Giver and 1, 2, 3 Red Light. I mean, I Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes. I love those songs because they bring me back to a place where I'm going to Grandma's or whatever. But there was a ton of good music just out there for you to take. You didn't have to search it out. It was there. It was your dad would turn on the radio, and You Really Got Me would come on. You'd be like, oh, shit, listen to that, and it wasn't until the FM, I think, when things kind of started partitioning, because I had a babysitter. She was the first person that ever played me a George Carlin record, and she made me swear. She says, "You cannot tell your parents I played you this." I'm like, okay, cool. I didn't know what I was into when I heard him cuss. It was the first time I ever heard anybody cuss on a record. I mean, I almost fainted. But I remember her telling me, she's like, "You got to stop listening to this AM stuff. There's this FM station where they play stuff that's a lot less bubblegum." And I didn't understand what she meant. I was like, bubblegum? What do you mean? I don't bubblegum, huh? And the thing was, she was mostly talking about like Led Zeppelin and Santana and the stuff that was big then. I hated Led Zeppelin until I was like 30. I never listened to Led Zeppelin at all until I was like 30. And Vess turned me on to the first record. He's like, you really should listen to this first record. And I'm like, all right. And I heard Communication Breakdown, and I was like, damn, that is pretty good, And I was. When Led Zeppelin came to town in 1977, is that when I think, is that right? 77? Does that sound right? They played Market Square Arena?
That sounds right. That would have been right. I was still in Chicago then.
Okay.
I think.
Well, what happened was everybody bought their tickets that weekend, and everybody brought their tickets to school, going, "Look, I got Led Zeppelin tickets. I got Led Zeppelin tickets." I came to school with a copy of Marquee Moon that I had bought over the weekend. Nobody gave a shit. I'm like, dude, you got to hear this. This is awesome. And everyone's like going, Led Zeppelin, I got Led Zeppelin tickets. And like, nobody gave a crap. So, I was
Marquee Moon was engineered by Glenn Johns, too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, that's the Led Zeppelin guy, man.
Yeah. So, but nobody wanted to know. They were just like, you weirdo. If I wasn't somewhat of a funny, charming person, and I'm not scratching my back or anything, but if I wasn't, I would have gotten beat up a lot more than I did. So, because, back then, I'm fairly certain that I am the first person probably in this side of the state that had that Ramones album, because I bought it the week it came out.
Right.
So, I mean, and I know...
You think you beat Marvin to the Ramones?
I think I did, but I would never say that in front of him, just because why bother?
Right.
Why bother? I like Marvin just fine, but yeah, he's got a Ramones thing going on that It beats pretty much. I mean, there's no band I love that much. I mean, there's no relative that I love that much. So, all right, let's move forward a little bit then. So at what point did you decide that you wanted to be in a band, or did that just happen naturally?
I was pretty sure I wanted to be in a band probably when I was 9 or 10, listening to the radio and listening to Beatles records and stuff like that. I mean, it just seemed like the logical thing. I had 2 older sisters that are 9 and 10 years older than me, and they loved the Beatles. I mean, they were in love with the Beatles. So I think that for me, it seemed like, okay, well, I want to do that because the girls who are important to me in my life love that, right? Yeah. So I think that was a big part of it. And then it was when I moved back to Indianapolis to go to high school. That's right when, the Ramones and the Sex Pistols were becoming somewhat more available. Nevermind the Bullocks came out. And I think that it was when I got that record and I bought the concept. Like, I didn't understand yet, because I was already listening to Kiss, but Kiss seemed like I could do that. Right. Like, they seemed like magical, mythical creatures. Whereas the Sex Pistols were like, oh, fucking anybody can do this. Even though they're clearly at least as good, if not a better band, and make a better record. But the hype behind punk rock was like, just get a guitar and do it. Anybody can do it. So I formed a band in high school, met a couple of guys in theater class. They were musicians. I wasn't yet. I got a guitar. I learned to play. Probably Ramone songs were the first songs I learned to play on guitar, just enough to be able to have to go to rehearsal. Rehearsal was, in their basement, and an excuse to hang out together after school and smoke weed and drink orange vodka or whatever horrible thing we could get our hands on, and then then that was it. Punk rock is it was the gateway into music from a performance aspect. And the weird thing about it is that, like, I hadn't heard the Stooges yet. I hadn't heard the MC5 because I didn't have an older uncle who was like, actually knew where all this was coming from. I thought that the Sex Pistols and the Ramones had just like invented themselves out of thin air. But, shortly after that, I started hanging out with older musicians. I was kind of recruited into the Zero Boys when they came to see my high school band play at a party. They were looking for a singer, right? And so they recruited me, and then they realized, Terry, the guitar player, realized that I had this big hole in my education. And he just made me a cassette that had, the Dictators and the Stooges and, all that on it. And then that was when I realized, okay, I see the lineage of all this. A good cassette could change your life.
That's right. If you knew someone who had a good record collection and a cassette recorder, which wasn't that common at that point. Not a lot of people had them. And then, like, a good cassette could really it would just open your world up, And especially because it would contain stuff from 20 different albums. Who could afford to go buy 20 records at the same time? This way, you were getting a little bit of, a little bit of everything. But yeah, I mean, I was extremely lucky to have certain people in my life who kind of pushed me, because I had heard of Iggy at one point when I went to New York for that trip I told you about. I had heard of Iggy, but all I ever heard was Raw Power. Raw Power, Raw Power, Raw Power. And I kept telling my uncle, I said, if I can find a copy of Raw Power, I think I should buy it. And he said, no, you need Funhouse. Right. And I'm like, Funhouse? I haven't heard of that one. He goes, you need Funhouse. Right. That's the one you want. And they had just been reissued in Europe. The other thing about these records is by the time we wanted them, they weren't available. Mm-hmm. None of that stuff was in. But Modern Lovers wasn't in print. The Stooges albums weren't in print. The Velvet Underground albums. I got White Light, White Heat for 99 cents in a cutout bin. And that was the only one I could find. And I remember I didn't have a stereo at the time, so I took it to school and played it in the library on one of those little mono turntables they had. And I was just like, man, that sounds horrible, but it also sounds great. What's going on here? Yeah, I mean, that was the thing is you couldn't find a lot of the records that we now take for granted as part of the part of the basic package.
It was a lot easier. It's hard for me to relate. It was a lot easier for it to really your world to revolve around this, because it took a great deal of effort
Yes.
to put a collection together, to meet like-minded people, and just even the act of making somebody a cassette. Just think of the effort. So if you liked somebody enough, some young person, and you wanted to educate them on music, and I'm going to make them a cassette. This is going to be great. You'd put a lot of yourself into that.
Yeah.
You had to play each song in real time. And then as you got towards the end of the cassette, you'd have to look at it and go like, what am I going to fit in that last little bit, so that this side doesn't have this wasted space? I mean, it was like a whole ritual that you would do. And then you would give that to somebody, or somebody would give it to you. And there was this exchange of energy that was so much bigger than like, if I were to make you a mix right now on CD or just send you a playlist, I wouldn't even listen to the stuff.
No, I know.
I would just send it to you. And so I wouldn't be having that experience of being
Right.
like, I'm going to fucking put this,
After you made the cassette, did you listen to it all the way through to make sure that it was coherent?
Yeah.
You're like the right song, follow the right song.
Yep.
Well, I don't want to be too hokey about it, but I would also say that the act of making a cassette for someone, there was a certain amount of love that went into
Absolutely.
it. Because you were sharing something that you loved with a person that you supposedly loved as well.
Right.
And you were trying to share this experience with them. And there was always that disappointment, when they'd listen to it, they go, well, yeah, I liked it okay. Or if they'd say something like, well, yeah, that was interesting. And you're like, that's what people say when they don't like it, But, I had sort of a way that I would do it. I mean, to get people into punk rock who had no vision of it or no experience with it, you had to start slow. I would start them with, like, some Niccolo, some Dave Edmunds, just some stuff that, like, wasn't really punk, but was kind of leaning in that direction, but was still melodic enough that you could hook them.
Mm-hmm.
Perubu didn't come until tape 4 or 5.
Right.
So, well, I remember giving that to some people, and they just look at me like, "What in the hell?" I'm like, "Well, you either get it or you don't, I guess." So, yeah. And as far as bands were concerned, you were definitely ahead of me there, because I wasn't allowed to have a guitar. I'm not going to go into the history of me and my relationship with my dad, but he had very concrete ideas about what is and what isn't. And I asked for drums pretty young, and there was no way they were going to put up with that noise in the house. There was no way. When I would go visit my grandmother, my uncle had his drum set up, but I wasn't allowed to touch it. But being a stupid kid, 4 or 5 years old, I would go in there when no one was looking. I'd put on the headphones, thinking that they wouldn't be able to hear me if I had headphones on. And I would always put on Strawberry Fields Forever and try to play along with that. I'd get maybe the first verse, and my grandma would come in and go, you're not supposed to be on those. And I'd go, and then I'd leave, and like a half hour later, she'd be out doing laundry, and I'd go and I'd do it again. I'm sure my uncle probably wouldn't have minded had he known, but he wasn't there and he didn't know, so she kept me off of him.
Right.
I asked my dad for a guitar when I was in high school, or I didn't ask him for one because I knew he wouldn't give me one, but I was going to buy one. And he kept saying no. And finally, I went and bought one. It was a quarter-size melody maker, and I started taking lessons from Scott Ballantyne. And I came home and started practicing. He tried to show me Maybelline. That's the first thing he showed me. My dad goes, where'd you get that? And I said, I bought it. And he goes, well, you can't practice in the house. And I said, well, why not? I said, I've got a little headphone jack here. You don't even have to hear it. He says, nope. He says, look, people like Eric Clapton and those people, they start playing when they're like 4 or 5 years old. You're already in high school. It's a waste of time for you to start now. And he literally would not let me practice in the house. He didn't actually want to see the guitar. And he had nothing against rock and roll or anything. He had like Buddy Holly records and stuff. He just wanted me to do very specific things. Like go to the Army and get out of his house. So I had to give it up after about a month. I mean, I had nowhere to go to play. I wasn't getting anywhere because I couldn't practice. And so finally, like a year or two later, I go to my friend Phil's house. He's got a drum set in his garage, and he's trying to learn guitar. So we start playing surf music in his garage, and that's how it started. But yeah, a lot of it had to do with, I assume you were probably encouraged to do a lot of this stuff, right?
I was, although I do specifically remember having this conversation with my mom. We were driving in her VW Bug, and this was probably in about 72 or something like that. So I was like 9 years old. I still remember this conversation. I said to her, we were listening to the radio, and I said, I really want to be a musician when I grow up. And she was like, that's just too hard of a life. I don't think that I don't know that you'll be able to do that. And it's like one of the only discouraging things my mother ever said to me. But of course, when I had a guitar and started playing and practicing with the band, she let me practice in the basement. But I just think that for her generation, it just didn't make any sense.
They had no reference.
No reference.
Yeah, I agree because I can tell my dad today that there are lots of people that didn't start playing guitar until they were like 16 or 17, and they worked out just fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Tom Shover, you know Tom Shover, right?
Uh-huh.
He didn't start playing guitar until he decided he wanted to be a guitar player in a band when he was like 30. He didn't start playing guitar. He always played drums, and when Kowalski formed, he goes, well, I want to play guitar, so I'm going to learn how to do it for that. He had only been playing guitar for a year or two when we saw them.
But learning guitar doesn't take that. It's not that long.
Well, I guess for some people.
Well, yeah. With the reverse, well, I mean, to get good at it, it's a lifelong venture. But the reverse of this, now I have a 12-year-old, and he's required to play guitar. He begrudgingly plays guitar. And he's got a pretty good instructor, but it's like, yeah, I mean, to me, it's like basic education. You're not going to make it out of this house without being able to play an instrument. You don't have to be good at it, but you have to spend 20 minutes a day at least.
Right.
But I heard him the other day playing Stepping Stone, and it just blew my mind because, one, it sounded great, and his instructor, I didn't know that he had learned that song. It wasn't my idea. I didn't play it for him or anything. But that's one of my favorite songs of all time.
Yeah, I was about to say you could do a lot worse.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue on. So they've recruited you for the Zero Boys, and they've given you a crash course in back catalog.
That's right.
At what point? How long is it between now and when you record the first record?
Well, let's see. So, I think Terry the guitar player had a really solid idea of what he wanted. He had some songs already. I don't know that they had lyrics or not, but he had some riffs and he had this vision, and that's why he was able to give me this cassette, and it was basically like, here's a bunch of stuff you haven't heard. This is what I want to do, So then we start practicing, and all we do is covers, because that's a great way to get up off the ground quickly. Yeah. And so we learned some Ramones songs and some, Sex Pistols songs and some Dictators songs. And then so once we had, like a dozen or so covers that we'd learned, then it was like, okay, now let's write something. And so then I think we wrote that first EP, which just sounds like a band trying to be the Ramones and the Dictators and the Sex Pistols, But
that was okay back then.
It was okay. And there weren't that many bands, so there was plenty of space.
Yeah.
And we made that record, I believe, probably within 9 months of being a band. I think from the time that we first practiced together to when the record was maybe even pressed and out, it was about 9 months.
Now, you weren't doing a lot of touring then. You were mostly just playing in town, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because, back then I don't remember a lot of punk bands piling into a van and doing the whole DIY thing. I mean, that seemed to have been like a couple of years later.
Yeah, that's right.
It seemed like most bands stuck in their hometowns for the most part.
Yeah. We were a punk rock band at that point, and then we started hearing kind of more of the American hardcore bands like Black Flag and the Circle Jerks and the Dead Kennedys, and we got very excited by that, playing even faster and more kind of, yeah, I guess just more political humor lyrics and,
right.
That kind of thing. But those bands were touring, those bands were making it from California to the Midwest to at least play Chicago and stuff like that. So it became, the DIY scene kind of came out of that, and people started to realize that, look, the Replacements are only in Minneapolis. They might as well get to Chicago, and then maybe we can get them to come to Indianapolis or... and so watching the other bands tour around, we eventually did tour, but not until 82.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Because, I remember telling Bill the same thing. I remember, because when he was booking bands, I was like going, dude, I said, Husker Du's pretty big. I think they only charge like $300 for a show, and they're only 10 hours away. Why don't you give him a call? You know, and I remember. Do you remember when John Cale played the patio in like 1981?
No.
Okay, John Cale played the patio in 1981. We got a phone call about a month before its second time around. It was from Sunshine Promotions, the people that brought him, and this is how little punk rock was making its way around. The guy asked Dave Fulton. He goes, "Hey," he goes, "John Cale, he's the guy that does cocaine, right?" And he goes, "No, that's J.J. Cale." And Dave hears the guy on the phone go, "We got the wrong Cale." But they had already signed the contract. So, he came, and they actually broadcast that show on WFBQ. It was a simulcast, which I don't know how the hell that happened, because I guarantee you they never played a single John Cale record on WFBQ. But yeah, they recorded. But I remember Dave just laughing. He hung up the phone, and he was still laughing. He was like, "You're not going to believe what they just..." And then he was like, "John Cale's coming to town." So, like, yeah, I mean, that's what it was like. I don't know if you remember, but a lot of bands didn't play Indianapolis at all for the longest time. And when they did start, what they would do is big bands like Fleetwood Mac or Journey, whoever, would play their first couple of shows of their tour, like in Indianapolis or Columbus or Cincinnati, where there wasn't a lot of press and they could work out the kinks of their show.
Yeah.
So that by the time they got to New York and Los Angeles, they would be a well-oiled machine. And so a lot of the times when we did get shows, it would be the very beginning of a tour. It was almost like Indianapolis was like a practice spot or something, I mean, Bill Levin, I think, had a fair share to do with kind of opening up who came to town. Because before Bill was bringing, people like Red Hot Chili Peppers or Replacements or Meat Puppets or whoever, there was nothing to see.
Well, the Crazy Owls.
Well, Crazy Owls.
So Crazy Owls had X, the Go-Go's,
the Cramps and the Ray
Beats, and James White and the Blacks. So there was a couple years there, 80, 81, where there was a fair amount of cool stuff that was coming on. If you were 21 and you could get in.
Yes. Well, also, what I remember, though, is there was a lot of time passed between each one of those shows. You had to wait around for a show to show up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, by the mid-'80s, you could see a show 2 or 3 times a month if you really wanted to, But I remember there for a while, that's why we started going up to Chicago. Because if you wanted to see, like, the Clash or the Buzzcocks or something, it was either Chicago or you're not going to see them. I don't think the Buzzcocks have still, to this day, ever played Indianapolis.
No.
I've seen them 4 times. All 4 times I had to go to Chicago.
Yeah.
And the Clash, I don't think they ever played here.
No, they never played here.
No. I mean, you had to be willing, like you said, to put the effort in.
Yeah, I remember back in those days too, because there was a couple of those shows I was able to sneak into, but the culture was so different here, because we were used to like these cover bands, or it's like if you played a set at Crazy Owls, you had to play more than one set. You couldn't just play one set.
Right.
So a band like DNA would come and play. They're not used to playing 2 sets. They have to play 2 sets in New York City.
I think their whole set was only a half hour long.
That's right. But they had to play it twice.
Yeah. Yeah. Which we thought was fine. We were just like, great, I get to see them twice. But yeah, it's hard to explain to kids now, especially with the internet, when you can find out like anything you want at the touch of a button. Do you remember how you'd buy an issue of Cream and you'd be flipping through it and you're like, the Who have a new album coming out, or they have a new album out. Nowadays, 10 months in advance that Pete Townsend has gone to the studio with Roger Daltrey to record an album, and you know what's coming 10 months ahead of time. But back then, you didn't know until it was already out and the ads were out. And your information came on a monthly basis instead of every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not sure. I was listening to a podcast the other day about technology and people's use of it, kind of catching up to the technology. And they were saying, like, what if you gave an atomic bomb to the ancient Romans? Would they be able to handle having it? Would they just willy-nilly just start dropping them everywhere, or what? And it's kind of the same with the internet. I think mankind is about 30 or 40 years behind the proper use of the internet. I think there's a lot of bad shit going on in the internet that maybe doesn't need to be going on, but it's the genie's out of the bottle, and now it's I don't want to get into this subject, but I just think that perhaps mankind is going to have to catch up to having all the information he wants.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something I think about a lot as far as technology and how we as a people, as human beings, are willing to go to the next level of technology before it's ready or before we're ready.
Right.
You know, and I've seen that in my business as a recording engineer. It's like we went from analog to digital way before digital sounded any good.
Right.
It's like we went from vinyl to CDs.
Do you remember
Way
those first
before-
CDs that came out? Oh my God. That first Rolling Stones greatest hit CD I had that shitty stereo version of Satisfaction on it, which might be one of the worst recorded albums or singles I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't sound like Satisfaction at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was like some of it's coming out over here, some of it's coming out over here, and I swear to God it was out of sync. It was the worst sounding CD ever.
Uh-huh.
But it was the only one you could get.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we fell for the CD thing, and then vinyl disappeared, and it's the same thing with recording. You're going from tape machines to computers. It's like, there's always some advantage that we're looking for. There's something that's supposed to be great about this, but we're willing to leave behind the fact that it doesn't sound as good, and that there's a lot about the way to operate it that's questionable. It changes the way records are made, but now we've been making records digitally for 30 years, and the technology is pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, digital recording sounds good. If you use it properly, you can make a great recording. I personally don't feel like there's any advantage to analog over digital at this point. But back 10 years ago, I did.
Right.
And 15, 20 years ago, I definitely did. And it was because it didn't sound as good. But there's something about human beings that we're willing to just jump into stuff because it's the supposed future before we have any business being involved.
Convenience is king.
Yeah.
All right. I know I keep bouncing back. I'm trying to keep this linear, but actually, I guess it's okay that it's not. So when you recorded that first album, I think I already know the answer to this, but did you have any idea whatsoever that it was going to become what it became? I mean, that album is pretty fucking legendary at this point.
Oh, the album.
Yeah.
So we're beyond the EP. Yeah. No. Hell no. No.
I knew that was the answer, but I just wanted to get it on tape.
I mean, I still don't buy that it is, but I guess, some people really like it, and so that's awesome, but okay, I know this about it. We rehearsed our asses off to make that record.
Right.
We had $800 that we made at gigs and saved up and sold T-shirts and whatever, and that was the total budget that we had. We wanted to go into a real studio. The studio was whatever, $400 a day or something like that. We knew that the only way we were going to be able to make a good record was to be really well rehearsed. We rehearsed in Marvin's brother's garage every day for like 2 months, running through the songs, and we made little 4-track demos of the songs. I mean, we were extremely well prepared. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, those guys, Terry, the guitar player, Tufty, the bass player, and Mark, the drummer, were all amazing musicians. They were amazing musicians way before they were in the Zero Boys. Those guys were all in their 20s and had played in a bunch of other bands. And I didn't know any better. I was 16 and I just thought, well, I'll just write a handful of lyrics and I'll go in and I can do this in one take. And, so what I had was tenacity and no self-consciousness, which I think is a good formula for a rock and roll singer, right?
Sure.
And so we just went in, and then I think in a day we blasted through the record, and in another day, and all live, including the vocals. We overdubbed some guitar, we overdubbed some background vocals, we mixed it like the next day. And we were doing the whole record for Gulcher, at the time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, at the time, the
Man.
the Gizmos and Dow Jones, these were hero bands of ours, and they were all out on Gulcher. And so it made sense if you were a band from Indiana at that moment, you wanted to be on Gulcher. That was the ultimate. And so we made the record and then gave it to Bob Richards, and he was like, "Oh, I don't like it."
Really?
So now we're like, yeah, thought we were gonna, that he was gonna pay for the pressing, and then we would go out on tour, whatever. And so he said no. And so then we were like, then we start sending it around to like Bomp and Frontier and, Alternative Tentacles and all these labels that we really liked. And I don't think anybody really responded because we were from nowhere. And, and so luckily Bill Levin had a little bit of money and he pressed it up and, and then somehow it has survived, all this time. I mean, I just, in the last 6 months, I just made $680 in royalties from that record, which is not a lot, but it's like if you'd have told me when I was 17 years old that when you're 53, people will even know about this record or that you'll get a small check or whatever, I would have been no way. So.
But it's got to be a good feeling to know that out there are these kids who had that record and put it on and just thought it was their fun house, or it was their white light, white heat, or it was their special record that sort of was the doorway to them going somewhere else. You know,
absolutely.
I mean, you got to have some pride in that.
Well, that's actually absolutely how I look at it. I get it. Like, to me, that record will never be one of those records. But if that record is to anybody one of those records, or even almost one of those records, then that's
sure
it. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I can guarantee you, there's nobody out there who treated a Math Bats record that way.
Well, your records just never got that kind of a chance. Like, I'm not sure why the Zero Boys record did, but it's an early American hardcore record. It was made in a particular style at a particular time, and that has a lot to do with why anybody ever heard the record. Because, look, when Green Day came along 10 years later, and we're doing a kind of a pop punk thing, and pop punk became huge, right? If you were a Green Day fan, then you would probably eventually you'd find, Operation Ivy, and maybe then you'd get Ramones records and Sex Pistols records, but then, like, what's the next layer? And it's like early American hardcore, and in particular, that Zero Boys record it's a pop punk record, way before that style. And so that has a lot to do with it. It's in a style of music that somehow has just kind of gone on.
Right.
There's pop punk fans, new pop punk fans all the time. Like, I don't get it, but there are.
It's got hooks. I'll tell you that from a neutral standpoint, the songs have hooks, and that is above all else. That's going to be the first thing your brain grabs onto.
Uh-huh.
The earworm, the song that you heard yesterday that for some reason you can't get it out of your mind while you're at work.
Uh-huh. Well, you know why that record has hooks? Because of Kiss and Cheap Trick.
Yeah.
Because in growing up in the Midwest and listening to rock and roll radio, the hook was king.
Right.
And there are
for me, it still is.
It still is. To me, absolutely, it still is. It's in our DNA. But you listen to, like, a lot of the hardcore punk bands from, like, even Chicago, which is not that far away, and it's much more angular, much less hook,
right?
Driven, and for a lot of the California bands as well. It's just not as hook driven.
On a lot of the California bands, though, when you're talking about influences, a lot of the early California punk bands, I can definitely hear the surf in there.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
So I mean, you're right. I mean, your location, I think, has a lot to do with where you end up. Now, when you were making that album, were you already interested in production? Were you kind of like watching the guy produce it, going, "Hey, I could do that"? Or
I was, like you, I was a record listener.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how it went, but I knew what it was supposed to sound like. So the first time we went in to record was the EP, and it was down in this guy's basement, and he had a 1/2-inch 8-track machine. And as soon as I walked into his little basement studio, I was just like, fuck, this is it. This is all I don't ever want to leave this room. Like this is all I ever want to do. So I immediately fell in love with it. When we made the Vicious Circle album, we worked with this guy, John Helms, who had a real studio. It was, 16-track, 2-inch MCI tape machine, big giant room. I mean, it was like the whole deal. And, but he was not into punk rock. He didn't know what punk rock was supposed to sound like. But
unless you were under 20, nobody was back
nobody,
then.
right. But I was smart enough that I brought in like the Germs record, which at the time I thought was the best sounding record, like just sonically,
right.
And I played it for him. I said, this is what we're trying to do. So even though I had no idea what the technology was, I was already being a producer, because that's what a producer does. It
right.
just says, this is what we're looking for. And he got it. He immediately heard it. Oh, that's like a harmonizer they're using on the guitar. It's like he knew the technology. And so we just basically tried to sonically make it that record. And then immediately after that, I start talking to him about, how can I get into this? How can I do this engineering thing? There were no audio engineering programs. There were the one at IU hadn't started yet. You could maybe go to Berkeley and study audio engineering, but there were not that many audio programs. So back then you always learned through some sort of apprenticeship thing.
Right.
But he was really smart. He said to me, look, my studio needs business, and you seem to be kind of somewhat attached to this scene. He said, I'll tell you what, you go out and find some bands to record, and I'll teach you how to record them.
That is a cool deal.
That's a cool deal.
Yeah.
And so what I did, then I go out and I'm looking around the landscape, and I go like, okay, this is Boston, not L.A. Decline of the Western Civilization. It's like these are these punk rock compilations that are coming out, East Coast and West Coast. I said, well, what if I did that in the Midwest? So that's when I was like, okay, I know Toxic Reasons from Dayton. I know DeKreutzen from Milwaukee because we've played with these guys, Articles of Faith in Chicago. Look, what if I just get all these bands to come to Indiana? I'll pay for the recording, and then I'll put out the record. So I got a little loan from my brother and my dad to press up the record. I paid for the studio time. I went in. This guy, John Helms, who was genius, he's like, this is how you EQ a snare drum. So I bought the studio time, and he taught me. And then, so I went from knowing nothing to being a record engineer, producer, within a matter of months, because he needed work, and he was smart enough to say, like, okay, this is, how can we, we make this mutually beneficial.
Sure.
So I never got anybody coffee. I was never like an intern. Right. I was just like, I was a client,
right. Now, when you started getting into that, did you start to lose interest in maybe being in a full-time touring band?
Yeah, I was never that. I was pretty, I was a skinny little kid. I was pretty frail in some ways, like to touring life and stuff like that. Like I didn't... We went out, the Zero Boys went out to the East Coast, and there was a lot of tension in the band, especially between Tufty and the guitar player, Terry. Terry was kind of prone to getting really fucked up and disappearing with some girl, like when it came time to load out the gear. So we were in Philadelphia backstage. It's freezing cold. For some reason, we go to the East Coast in like February or some shit like that. And so we're backstage at this place in Philadelphia where nobody came to see us. And Terry and Tufty square off and start beating the shit out of each other. And Tufty breaks off one of Terry's front teeth, And I'm like... I don't think this is for me, So yeah, once I started making records, and then not long after that, my wife had a child, you know. So I became a dad when I was 20. So touring became like not the thing. But I can honestly say that I was always more into records than I was into the live thing. Even when I went to see bands live, I loved it, you know, Cheap Trick and all the different bands that I saw when I was, you know, 13, 14 years old. But I always like to listen to the records at home more, you know.
Well, you were also, though, you were doing some live sound around town, weren't you?
Uh-huh.
Now, was that something you did just for extra money, or did you just, because if you don't enjoy live stuff as much as studio stuff?
Well, you know, when you're a recording engineer landlocked in Indianapolis, you got to do whatever will pay the bills. So I would probably have not done as many live gigs if I didn't need the money.
All right.
But I didn't hate them.
All right, well, then I got to ask you this, and this is sort of in reference to a guitar player we both once knew. Did any band ever piss you off enough that you fucked with their sound while they were playing? You don't have to mention names or anything, but
I don't think so.
Because you remember, I'm sure you remember Moamar. I don't remember.
Oh yeah,
I don't remember his real name.
I do. He's a friend of mine on Facebook.
I always got along with him fine. I have no problems with him. But you know, there was a certain member of our band that hated him.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And every time we'd play, he would just be a total asshole to him. And he'd go, hey, turn up the monitors. I can't hear shit. And I have him on tape actually saying, do your job. And like stuff like that from the stage. And, you know, we would pull him aside and we'd go, look, would you piss off someone who's fixing your car? Would you piss off someone who's cooking your food? Don't piss off the guy who's responsible for our sound.
Uh-huh.
And he would do it anyway. He'd go, you fuckwad, I'll come back there and do it myself. If you can't do it, I can't. And we were just like, it drove us to distraction. And I was always convinced, I would always ask after the show, I'd say, did everything sound okay? Because I was always convinced that he'd go, I'll show you. Fuck you. So I was always just kind of curious if there was any retribution involved with the job.
Yeah, I don't believe I ever participated in something like that. I do know that from touring and playing gigs as a musician, sound people can be some of the grumpiest people in the world.
Do you blame them?
No, because they're abused on a regular basis. But yeah, I've had some bad encounters. So whenever I am involved in a live gig these days, and still will tour around a little bit, the first thing I do is I go right in and I become the best friend of the sound person.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just like, hey man, what's your name? This is what I do too. You know,
can I get you a Coke?
That's right.
Are you okay? You know,
that's right. That's the way you treat the person. Exactly. That's just like.
But for whatever reason, he didn't get it. He didn't, you know, and even Eric, you know, someone who's not exactly Mr. Pleasant 24 hours a day, would pull him aside and go, "Come on, man, cool out." You know, it just didn't work at all. Man. Black Brittle Frisbee, when that whole thing came around, I didn't know that Fred wanted to be on it. I had no idea. And so when the listing of all the people were announced for that, he got really, really mad at me. I mean, he was like, "Why aren't we on that?" And I was like, "Well, you live in Thailand," or wherever the hell he lived at the time. I said, I wasn't really thinking that you would want to fly in, you know, to record some songs that we probably haven't practiced in 4 years since we're not really a going concern anymore. But he got furious about that. Well, I mean, he got furious about a lot of things. But, you know, to this day, he wishes that he had not gone on to do what he did. But he wished he would have stayed in Indiana and gutted it out, because he's convinced that we would have been like the next REM or something.
And well, you guys were a great band.
We were fun live sometimes, but I don't think we had the hooks. I don't think we certainly did not have the singer. Let's face it, we all were horrible singers, horrible singers. And if you ever want proof of that, I have a tape of the Sonic Youth Mushroom Night. You know what I'm talking about? Eric was on vacation, and he refused to call off his vacation for the show. So we brought in Will Sibley's brother John to play bass, and Fred sang all the songs. Oh my God, they sound horrific. But not only that, John had taken like 2 or 3 grams of mushrooms before the show, and he's half naked, jumping around, playing whatever he wants. Not our songs, but whatever he wants. And then afterwards, we got like 10 or 12 grams of mushrooms left, and we go backstage. We're like, hey, you guys want some mushrooms? And 3 of them ate the entire bag. Kim was really shitty.
I bet.
She was just like, you guys aren't going to eat those, right? Oh, yeah, we are, blah, 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 blah. Now, I remember it being a great show, but she hated us.
Mm-hmm. It was a good show. That was a Hoosier Ballroom?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great, they played great.
Yeah. I mean, some forms of music you can play better when you're tripping, I think. But, and that was a good example. But, yeah, I saw something once where they even referenced that as the Mushroom Show. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
but,
well, you know, on the Math Bats, the guy who owns the record store here in town, Landlocked, which is a great record store, one of the owners, recently, within the last couple of years, pulled me aside and said, what's the deal with the Math Bats? And I'm like, how do you even know about the Math Bats? And he's like, well, we got a copy of this record in the store, you know, 2 months ago or whatever, and I noticed your name's on the back of it, and it's incredible. So maybe Fred was right.
I don't know. You know, he's right about so few things. Maybe I'll give him 1 or 2. But, yeah. But I got to congratulate you also because, you know, and maybe you can elaborate on this. I don't remember. But I remember when Black Brittle Frisbee was going on, the guys in Bramble Grit were, like, bitching about it for some reason. Do you remember this?
No, but I'm not surprised. I mean,
I know they bitched about everything. But the thing is, like, on a good night, they were the best fucking band in town. Mm-hmm. But on a bad night, you couldn't get out that door fast enough, and there was nothing in between. Mm-hmm. It was just it was one or the other. You made them sound fantastic on that record. That was the best they have ever sounded, and everybody's going like, "Man, that sounds great. That Alibi and the Nude, you know, I mean, that's awesome." And they were like, Paul wouldn't let us, blah, 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 or we wanted an extra 5 hours. Or it was like they were bitching about everything that you had outlined clearly before it started.
Right.
You know? And I just remember thinking, man, what a thankless job Paul has having to deal with all this shit. Because we kept telling them, dude, it sounds good.
Right.
Leave it alone. And they're like, well, Paul wouldn't let us do this. Paul, we needed to blah, 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 blah. And I think it was mostly coming from Brad. But, because, you know, Matt and Will Sibley, and they're cool. They're like, oh, it's cool. But, yeah, it's just, I just wonder if you remembered anything about that.
What's that singer doing?
Steve? Mm-hmm. Do you really want to know?
Yeah.
Bramble Grit's still together.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They got a new singer. But they didn't want to kick Steve out. So what they did was they made him, they have an official name for it, but he's like I'm not going to say mascot because that sounds bad. But they have a name for him where he sits there with his lyrics and listens to them practice. And he goes, well, guy, I think maybe you should do it like this. He's like their coach, I guess.
Oh, right.
So
he's
basically,
their Van Dyke's Parks.
Yeah, they do the same songs. They just do them with a belter, you know, long hair, like.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where do they play?
I don't know.
In their basement?
I haven't talked. The last time I talked to Brad was at Math Bats reunion when I came back into town. And we played at Birdie's with Bramble Grit. And, you know, here's the weird thing, is I thought it would be fun since we were playing. I said, you know what would be fun? It'd be fun to have the original lineup of Bramble Grit together and play too. That would be fun. The minute I suggested it, all those old problems just came right up to the surface again. They couldn't just accept it as fun. Like, let's do something for fun. It was like, I get a phone call. How come you guys are playing first? And I'm like, dude, it's just a fun show for folks to relive their childhood. Or that's all it is. Just get up there and have some fun. Play some songs. How long do we have? We want to have exactly blah, 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 blah. It was all that. And you remember how you would tell them to play a certain volume, and then when you weren't looking, Brad would like turn it up, and it would be like painful. Like literally, like I remember times people would leave because it hurt. You know.
Terry, the guitar player in the Zero Boys, was like that. He would turn around and turn his amp up, and
there's something
kind of
about
antisocial sort of behaviors.
How we doing battery was there?
I think we're doing fine.
All right.
Plenty of battery.
Because I don't mind talking like this, but my God, this has taken a long time, and we've only gotten about halfway there.
Okay, well, let's fast forward. What do we got? What else you got?
Oh no, I don't mind talking. I'm enjoying it. But okay, so after Black Brittle Frisbee, I mean, there's some more Zero Boy stuff coming on. I mean, did you decide that you enjoyed doing it nonetheless, or was it necessity? Did you need some money, or because there's more Zero Boys albums after those, but few with lots of time in between them.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is that the Zero Boys, we go out east, then we go out west.
Now, was that with Bill?
That was with Bill. We went to the East Coast.
Can we pause just for a second for the Assmaster story?
Well, that was several years later.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so we'll get to that.
All right.
We'll try to. I'm just gonna blast through a bunch of this stuff.
Okay.
We'll go out to the East Coast. We meet a bunch of the like Boston, not LA people, like SSD Control and the Boston scene, and we play with the Beastie Boys in their early incarnation as a punk rock band in New York City. But we come back pretty wounded, and when we get into Indianapolis, it's freezing cold. Bill's house, where most of us live, the heat had been turned off and then turned back on, so it was raining in his house. And everybody has to get a little job, and we're barely surviving. And then, maybe 6 months later, we go out. We get a gig with the Dead Kennedys in California, so we go out and we play in Calgary and Vancouver. We're supposed to play in San Francisco, but the gig gets canceled. We make it down to Torrance. We play for the Dead Kennedys. This is like the ultimate gig. It's like the one gig where everything went right. There's like 2,000 people there. They're jumping off the PA. It's us, Millions of Dead Cops, Minor Threat, and the Dead Kennedys.
That's a hell of a lineup.
It was a fucking hell of a lineup. So that was great. That was like that moment in time where it's like it all seemed to be leading to that. And then we leave there and we play in Texas, we play in New Orleans, and then we come back home and nobody has a job, nobody nothing. And so the band pretty much starts to just peter out. Tufty, the bass player, says, I'm out of here. So he joins Toxic Reasons and they move to San Francisco. At that point, we pick up another bass player, but it never really happens, and It kind of peters out. Terry quits the band and joins something else. I start Dandelion Abortion, and then eventually the Datura Seeds, and then sometime around 88 or 89, we get an offer. The Zero Boys get an offer to come to Europe and open for Toxic Reasons. And so that's when Terry, the original guitar player, was now living in Florida. And so we hired Vess to kind of play his part.
Right.
And we went...
he was so excited.
Yeah.
I remember the day that you told him that. He came in the store and he goes, look, this is like if they ask you to play drums with wire. And I'm like, okay, I get it. It's cool. He was like a kid in a candy store.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, he did a good job.
He did.
And so we went to Europe, and that was fun, and came back. And then shortly thereafter, we...
Where did we leave off?
I don't remember. You were telling me about Rob Richards sending you a condom full of...
Actually, that was
hand lotion.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that was off the record. So, although I might bring it up when I talk to him at some point. And it wasn't hand lotion.
We don't need to talk about that in my interview.
Yeah, it's fine. So, okay, so let's start with the production stuff. I mean, you've put out a bunch of records, several different bands, and then you decide to start basically focusing on production. How did you end up down here in Bloomington?
Well, okay. I guess about 95 or so, I was driving down to Bloomington a lot to work at a studio down here called Echo Park. It was definitely the best recording studio in the state. Mm-hmm. So I was driving down here... an hour each way just to work.
Now, how did that happen? Did they hear about you and offer you a job, or did you
No, it was more... by this time I was completely independent of any studio, and I have been pretty much the whole time. So bands would contact me and say, hey, you want to make a recording? And then I would rent studio time and kind of do that. So I was coming down here and renting studio time from them. You know, I was a client. And then my first marriage started to dissolve, and I wanted to be, you know, close enough to still be able to see my kid, you know, often, but far enough away to not have to deal with, you know, seeing my ex all the time. So Bloomington seemed like a good place. I was working here all the time, so I moved down here. And that kind of started phase 2 of my production career. This was like, these were the post-Nirvana years where a lot of indie stuff was being signed by major labels. So I kind of got a series of 4 or 5 records in a row that had pretty big budgets.
Right.
And I was making them at Echo Park, which is a really nice studio. And then right around the time, you know, about 98, 99, when that started to peter out and none of the records that I made were really very successful for the major labels, I started working for Mellencamp right around that time. And so then I worked for him, and I've made, you know, worked on about 7 records over the years, but I've always continued to make smaller indie things. And sometime in that process, I started, you know, digital recording started to be the primary focus as opposed to analog. And so then having a studio to work in, having a big console and big tape machines were no longer necessary. And so, you know, the studio space could get smaller and smaller until eventually I'm working out of a room in my house.
Now, is this where you recorded your new album in here?
No, this is where I mixed it. This is where I do most of my mixing and mastering. So, you know, probably 60% of my workload is mixing, and maybe about 30% is mastering. And this is stuff that comes from all over the world, and it just comes over, you know, somebody has an album that they've cut themselves on Pro Tools and they're looking for somebody to mix it.
Right.
They've heard something that I've done before and like it, and so they email me, and they send me the files over the internet. I mix them and send them back, and we're never even in the same room. Sometimes you know, I'll Skype with the producer or whatever if there's some questions, but you know, so yeah. But the new album, the Ask record, was cut in our drummer's. We have a rehearsal space that's owned by our drummer, and he has a half-inch 8-track. So basically the same technology that we recorded the first Zero Boys record on, we did the Ask record on.
So you've come full vicious circle.
That's right. That's right.
Now, you know, I couldn't help but look up your Wikipedia page before I came over here just to make sure because I figured we knew each other well enough I could handle a conversation. But I haven't seen you since Germany in '93, so I figured maybe there might be something between '93 and now. So I looked up, you know, and there was a lot of names connected there, like Neil Young, Willie Nelson. I mean, is this how are these coming about? I guess. Or?
Well, certainly the Neil Young and the Willie Nelson connection. I worked on a live Farm Aid record. It was like a 2-disc Farm Aid record that came out in like whatever 2000 or 2001 or something like that, and it was one of these large projects that started out as an archival project. So we had to get all these tapes from Farm Aid, and some of them had to be baked, and then, you know, then we had to make rough mixes of the sets, you know. And so somebody like Neil Young, he's played at every Farm Aid.
Right.
So we had to make rough mixes of like 12 performances of his. And Willie, it's like he plays twice at every Farm Aid. He opens and closes the show. And so I made rough mixes for both of those artists, along with like Dave Matthews and all this other kind of, you know, there was Guns N' Roses stuff. And so it was a huge project, but the whole idea was that it would go off and be mixed by somebody else whose name I can't remember right now, but who was kind of famous for live record mixing. I wish I could think of his name. Anyway, he mixed 90% of the record, both Neil Young and Willie Nelson requested that the person who did the rough mixes actually do the final mix. Yeah. So, again, I was never in the same room. I have been in the same room with both of them, but neither of them were at the studio when I mixed those records. But, Neil was very complimentary. I saw him at the next Farm Aid, and he said he thought I did a great job.
And he's got picky ears.
He's got very picky ears.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because, he has a more raw aesthetic. So I think when he heard the final mixes, he was like, I like the rough mix better.
Right.
I'd have him do it and just turn the vocal up or whatever it was.
I can totally hear him saying that.
Yeah.
Too. So, or maybe he just wanted you to add more barn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Willie, Willie's just one of my heroes. I mean, there are just certain people, and Willie's one of them, they're just universally loved. I mean, you can hate country music, you're still going to like Willie Nelson. I mean, he's just a universally loved person. What a nice place that is to be,
Right. Well, I've never been around either of them a lot, but they're definitely both real down to earth. I've been backstage at Farm Aid a few times when they're around, and you don't get that. They're not unapproachable or weird at all. Right. I mean, they feel like the kind of people you can just go right up and talk to.
Yeah. I found, when I was working in Hollywood, I found a lot of it was the same thing. Is people put these actors and stuff on a pedestal, and they think that they're untouchable, unapproachable, whatever. But once you do it for a while, you realize that they just go to work.
They're doing their craft.
Go home to eat some dinner, go to bed, come back the next day. It's just that their job is better than yours. And they get paid more. And they get paid more for it. But it's the same thing. They go to work, they go home, eat dinner, they go back to work. I mean, and the vast majority of the people I met out there, and believe me, there was a lot of times before we would go shooting that they would go, do not talk to this person, do not approach this person, do not do this, do not do that. We'd all be scared, like, oh my God, this guy must be a huge asshole. Then you get on set and the person would be like joking around with people and having fun and stuff, and it would be nothing like what you had been warned about beforehand. I mean, there was exceptions. There were a few people I worked with that weren't entirely pleasant, but I would say for the most part, 90% of the people that I worked with, and some pretty huge names, were super nice people. Super nice people. So, yeah, it's just, I think you can let your job go to your head, or you can sort of keep it compartmentalized where it should be. And I think that's probably, Willie probably goes, yeah, I sing and play guitar, but other than that, let's just sit here and play cards and let me light up this spliff.
Hey, I've definitely saw him getting off the bus once in a cloud of smoke. It was just like out of a cartoon or something.
Yeah, it's kind of a dream of mine to be on Willie's bus with Willie for about 15 minutes.
I bet you could totally make that happen, man.
Honestly,
he's on that bus all the time.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would actually do the same thing we're doing now, except I would love to just be passing it back and forth. Not even bring it to the attention. Just let it go on while we're recording and see if anybody notices.
I had this one experience with celebrity. First of all, I'm obsessed with celebrity, but I don't like celebrity that's like talented celebrity. I like talentless celebrity. I just feel like it's the ultimate American experience, or modern experience. So this is one of the reasons why, Sid Vicious to me is the ultimate rock star, because he's got the look, he's got the attitude, and no talent. Like somehow that's just extra special to me. And
as cruel as this is going to sound, he died at the exact right moment.
That's right. It's the perfect story. It's the perfect rock and roll story.
He didn't have a chance to get embarrassing.
And he didn't become Elvis, Elvis would have been the perfect rock and roll story if he died when he was, 27
in the Army
or whatever. Right.
Yeah. Although, we wouldn't have the Memphis or the Comeback album, which I really like that stuff.
Yeah.
So.
But one time I did this Mellencamp gig, and it was a live gig, and it was at the White House. And this was Clinton was still president. Seems weird. It was that long ago. Anyway, And I was there to do like help with the broadcast sound. And so after we did the sound check, everything's set up outside, like a big giant tent, with a smaller kind of backstage tent set up next to it. And it's a benefit for like music in schools or something like that. And so I'm sitting back there. I'm one of the first people back there. I'm sitting there with like Mellencamp's guitar player, and we're eating food off the buffet and stuff. And I look up and I'm like, wow, that looks a lot like Eric Clapton, you know? And I'm like, oh my, we're at the White House. That's Eric Clapton, you know? It's like, and that looks like B.B. King, you know? And it was like one of those moments where it's like, wow, those two really pretty important people right there, right? But then it was like, there was that moment of like being a little nervous of being around somebody like that, but then within 20 minutes the whole place filled up with celebrities,
Right?
You know, so it's like, you know, it's people from movies. Sarah Jessica Parker's there, and this is right during her probably height in her career. Lenny Kravitz, Sheryl Crow, and it was like once the place was full of those people, none of them meant anything.
Right. It was. I hate it when I can't think of a word. Forget it. I can't think of a word. But yeah, what you're saying is 2 became 20, and thus it became
normalized.
Yeah.
It was just whatever
Right.
for people.
Well, you know, it's the same thing. I remember, like, I'm working on a movie, and I look over, and there's Harrison Ford. You know, and that's pretty much big. That's big.
That's big.
Yeah, and I'm kind of just looking up at the side. I'm like this, and what I see him doing is like sneaking over to our craft service so he can steal a banana. And I'm like going, all right. And that was the thing is, you know, what I found with a lot of these folks is that if you go up and you start with I'm your biggest fan, I've seen everything, blah, 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 they're not going to treat you the same as if you just go up to them and have a normal conversation about normal things.
Well, that's just like that's not a normal way to start a conversation with anybody,
Right.
is to be like a fan.
I'd be embarrassed if I don't ever expect that to happen, but if someone came up to me, I'm your biggest fan, blah, 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 you know, I would be embarrassed to the point of discomfort, you know. But if someone came up to me and said, like, you know, the pretty ripe bananas they got on that table, huh? I don't blame you for grabbing one.
Right.
That's, you know, conversation works a lot better than worship, I think.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, when you approach somebody by saying something like, I'm a huge fan, where does the conversation even go from there? Yeah. There's like, thank you. And then the conversation's, it's over now.
Yeah. And you
right?
know they've heard, the other thing is, you know they've heard it 1,000 times. And you know they probably don't want to hear it while they're having dinner, you know, or while they're having a serious conversation with their manager or whatever. Whenever I saw somebody in public, I never approached them, never, because I just felt like they deserve their privacy as much as anybody else.
It's interesting. I feel like I've been very fortunate to be a really big fan of some people that I've got to know really well. And that's one advantage of being involved in kind of a local music scene. So I would say that, you know, one of my favorite bands of all time, hands down, is Dow Jones and the Industrials.
Sure.
You know, I mean, it's a band that, they were the first band that I saw in a tiny little club that was as good as any arena show I'd seen.
Was it the Third Base show?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I played in that show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I was in the Cheeses from France.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
How could you forget?
I'm sorry.
I know we were upstaged by the retarded gods, but there's nothing I can do about that, you know?
But, you know, and then, like, meeting those people and hanging out with them and realizing, wow, these people are just as important to me as anybody, you know, in the Rolling Stones or anything like that, you know, and somebody like Dale Lawrence, same thing. So, you know, I feel very fortunate to have been a part of a music scene that in some ways kind of stayed small. You know, people they just stayed normal. You know, there was never an opportunity for anybody to be big-headed or anything like that.
And it was fun.
And it was
fun.
You
know, I mean, you know, it's kind of a cliche, but I tell people, I say, you know, when you live somewhere in Indiana, you got to make your own fun because there's just not that much of it around unless you like beer and football. You know? which, I like football okay, and I think I used to like beer somewhat, but no, if you want fun, you got to make it.
All right.
And that was, that was the thing. Being in a band was fun. Making your own flyers was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Going to Kinko's and making sure that they all came out okay was fun. The little minutia of having a band was fun for me.
That's right.
But if we'd had the internet back then, if we'd had the internet like 30 years before it is now, I'd still have a record store, because I'd be able to sell records like crazy over the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But, I'm not sure I'd want to do that. But I'm just saying, theoretically, I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what a different experience, though. Having to dig around, having to figure out this stuff, not knowing that much about the stars that you really liked. All of that kind of fed into the experience. And I just don't know that I don't know that you can have that same experience anymore. I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy or whatever, but I just don't know. I actually don't know if it's possible. It's like, Bowie, he changed his whole vibe every record, but but you didn't know anything about him, and I think if you're a fan of a celebrity at this point, unless the celebrity is making a super concerted effort, you can know way too much about them in a 5-minute internet search.
Yeah, easily.
And that robs us all of like the mystery, it's not as magical. They're not superheroes.
Do you remember buying records just because they look cool? Like you hadn't heard them, and you're like, well, I don't know, it looks cool. My mom used to do an imitation of me buying records, which is horribly emasculate. Or we'd have a party with a bunch of women, and you want to know what my son does? You want to know how he buys records? And my mom would do this. She'd go, let's see, I've never heard of them. They don't have any songs on the radio. They look like drug addicts. I'll buy it. And that was my mom's imitation of me buying a record.
All that sounds like a good reason to buy a record to me.
She wasn't entirely wrong, I guess, But it was right after I'd bought Loud, Fast, and Snotty that she started telling people. Because she looked at it, she was like, okay. And then she started doing this imitation at parties.
Yeah, well, that's one of the greatest records ever made. So, Mom, there you go.
Yeah, so...
You were right on that one. And it's a horrible cover. I mean, it's a perfect cover.
It's sort of washed out green.
No record looked like that. So low budget. Yeah, great record.
Yeah. All right, now, I guess we'll try to reach an end point here. But you were talking about how you worked on a bunch of records that weren't particularly successful. Mm-hmm. But within the last few years, you've worked on some that were fairly successful, right? I'm getting to this Lily and Madeline thing. That was fairly successful, wasn't it?
Yeah. By today's standards, absolutely. I think that Lily and Madeline, I started working with them about 4 or 5 years ago.
Now, you found them or they found you?
Well, a friend of both of ours, Faith Cohen, sent me a video clip of them. Her husband, Casey, knew their parents. Mm-hmm. And so she just sent me a video clip of them singing like a First Aid Kit song or something. And I watched it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. And by the time I had watched the thing 10 times, I was like, what am I doing? Because I've done this job for so long that you begin to get... Either you are jaded or you think you're jaded. You like so little that when you like something, it's you almost don't recognize it at first, So I fell in love with their singing, their harmonies, and their whole vibe was amazing. And so I brought them down to Bloomington, and we tracked some stuff together, and I ended up producing 3 full-length albums in 3 years, and I managed them during that period as well. I'm not managing them now. We've gotten to a point where they've, they went from being, 15 and 17 to 20 and 22 or whatever now. So they're kind of in charge of their own careers, but it was a great experience, and it definitely was successful by today's standards, and I think that they're on their way to having like a real career as
Right.
musicians.
Do you foresee producing them any further?
I don't think so. I think that we've done the best work that we can do together at this point.
And what other than your album that you got coming out Friday, you have anything else on the docket?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always doing stuff. I've made the last 3 records for this woman. Her name is Simrit, and she does this kind of new agey world music. She sings in Gurmukhi, and it's great stuff. It's kind of like psychedelic.
I think you posted some, didn't you?
Yeah, I've posted some.
I listened to all that stuff.
Yeah. It's like it's a little bit like a Mazzy Star-ish, I think. You know, it's kind of got that Southern California psychedelic vibe. And so that's beautiful. And I just finished mixing some stuff for her. And I just finished a record for this guy, Jason Wilbur, who is John Prine's guitar player.
Ooh.
And it's an amazing record. So Jason lives here in Bloomington, and so we were able to make the record over a long period of time.
Right.
So we made it all here in this studio. He plays pretty much everything on it, and it's a fantastic record.
Is this his first record?
It's not his first record. I think it's his 3rd or 4th record, but it's his best record, I'm pretty sure. And then I also teach at the university. I teach audio production at the university.
I didn't know that.
Yep. So, you know, it's just like I've always had to kind of diversify my my work in order to, you know, stay above water. So it's
sure.
like whether I'm doing live sound or mastering or mixing or teaching, or I do some archival stuff as well for people.
So you keep busy.
I keep as busy as I can. Yeah.
Well, gosh, I thank you for carving out these 2 hours for me.
Yeah, sure. It's great to see you, man.
All right. Well, I guess we could probably stop it there. Seems like a convenient place to stop.
All right.
Okay, great. If you've gotten this far, it means you've listened to the whole first episode from The Wrecking Yard. I'd like to thank Paul Mahern once again for carving out a chunk of his afternoon for me, and I would also like to offer a preemptive apology to Lily and Madeline for referring to them as that Lily and Madeline thing. I don't know why I said it like that. I would never refer to a couple of talented musicians as that blank thing. I guess it was just a brain fart. But I apologize in advance, and there you have it. I hope you tune in next week when we're going to have another interesting conversation with another interesting person, and I'm going to leave it a surprise until it happens. But until then, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to make a donation if you feel so inclined, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks again for listening.